What's up, my financially savvy friends, and welcome back to Boss Economic World. The only show on the internet that peels back the layers of the economic onion without making you cry, unless you're looking at your 401k on a bad day, in which case, we've all been there. Today is November 8th, 2025. And out there in the real world, things are getting weird. You see, our esteemed leaders in Washington D.C. have, for the past 6 weeks, been engaged in their favorite national sport, the government shutdown. It's like a high-stakes staring contest where the grand prize is, well, nobody's really sure, but the entire country loses. And who's caught in the middle of this political slapfight? None other than our favorite financial superheroes, the Federal Reserve. They're tasked with steering the $29 trillion U.S. economy, a job that's like trying to land a jumbo jet on an aircraft carrier in a hurricane. Now, imagine doing that blindfolded. That's right. The Fed is flying blind. They just had to make an interest rate decision, and they're gearing up for another one in December, all without their most crucial instruments. The government shutdown has turned off the data spigot, leaving Fed Chair Jerome Powell and his crew to navigate the world's largest economy using vibes, guesswork, and the economic equivalent of a magic 8-ball. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this data blackout. We'll explore why this isn't just some nerdy statistical problem but a ticking time bomb for your wallet. We'll break down the civil war brewing inside the Fed, and we'll restore the full picture of just how close to the edge Washington's dysfunction is pushing us. Grab your coffee, smash that like button, and let's get into it. Alright, let's set the stage. The Fed has two primary jobs, their dual mandate: keep prices stable and achieve maximum employment. For the past few years, it's been all about job number one. They jacked up interest rates at a historic pace to slay the inflation dragon that roared to life post-pandemic. It was painful, but it was working. Then, over the summer of 2025, something started to creak. Hiring slowed down. The job market, which had been hotter than a ghost pepper, started to look a little tired. The Fed, worried that they had over-tightened the screws and might accidentally trigger a recession, did something they hadn't done in a while: they cut rates. A quarter point in September, and another quarter point just last week, at the end of October. Now, that October cut was controversial. It was based on a gut feeling. They had the latest inflation data, which was still a bit spicy for their liking, but they didn't have the September jobs report because the shutdown had already begun. Powell basically said, look, things feel a bit wobbly, let's take out some insurance. He managed to get everyone on the committee to agree, holding hands and singing Kumbaya as they stepped back from the cliff's edge. But he immediately followed it up with a warning. He looked at the cameras and, in his best stern but calm dad voice, said that another cut in December was no sure thing. Why? Because the debate was about to get a whole lot messy. You see, the Fed is not a monolith. It's a committee of very smart people with very different opinions. Broadly, you have two camps. Team Dove, these are the worriers. They are terrified of a recession and rising unemployment. Their mantra is, it's better to cut rates too soon than too late. They see a weak job market and think, we have to act now before it's a full-blown crisis. They'd rather risk a little extra inflation than see people lose their jobs. Team Hawk, these are the inflation slayers. They have nightmares about the 1970s, when inflation ran wild for a decade. Their mantra is, don't you dare declare victory over inflation prematurely. They see any sign of economic strength as fuel for the inflation fire and believe that keeping rates high is the only way to ensure it's truly extinguished. Powell's job is to be the referee. But right now, the referee can't see the ball. Okay, boss, you're saying, so they're missing a few reports. Can't they just use other data? Let's be crystal clear, this is not like misplacing your grocery list. This is like a doctor trying to perform brain surgery based on a crayon drawing of the patient's head. The official government statistics are, as one portfolio manager put it, the gold standard. Everything else is a cheap imitation. Let's break down the two most important missing pieces of the puzzle. First, the big one, the jobs report. The monthly employment situation summary, released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is the heavyweight champion of economic data. It moves markets and shapes policy. But it's not one number, it's two completely different surveys that are stitched together. The Establishment Survey, this is where the headline non-farm payrolls number comes from. The BLS surveys about 122,000 businesses and government agencies. They ask, how many people are on your payroll? This is relatively straightforward. Companies have digital records. Even if the survey is delayed, they can probably pull up the data for the reference week and report it later. It'll be delayed, but it's gettable. The household survey, this is where the all-important unemployment rate comes from. This is a much trickier beast. The BLS interviews about 60,000 households, a process done in person and over the phone. They ask detailed questions: were you employed last week? If not, were you actively looking for a job? Now, imagine the government reopens in, say, late November. A BLS surveyor calls you up and asks, hey, quick question. For the week of October 12th, 6 weeks ago, was your 19-year-old son who lives in the basement actively looking for a job, or was he just thinking about it? You see the problem? Human memory is terrible. The longer the delay, the more the data becomes junk. Andrew Husby, an economist at BNP Paribas, put it bluntly, at a certain point, the BLS might just give up on the October household survey entirely. That would mean we might never get an official unemployment rate for October 2025. And even if we do get it, it will be a statistical nightmare. The government shutdown itself has furloughed roughly 650,000 federal workers. Are they unemployed? Technically, they're on temporary layoff. If you count them as unemployed, the Congressional Budget Office estimates the unemployment rate would artificially jump by 0.4 percentage points. So, if the rate comes in at, say, 4.3%, is the real rate 3.9%? Or did the underlying market also weaken? It creates a fog of war that allows both the doves and the hawks to see whatever they want to see. Second, the inflation ghost, the Consumer Price Index. If the jobs report is a mess, the CPI is a ghost. It's just gone. Collecting CPI data isn't a simple web scrape. It involves an army of BLS data collectors physically fanning out across the country, visiting thousands of retail stores, service outlets, and rental units to record prices for a basket of about 80,000 items. From the price of eggs in Omaha to the cost of a haircut in Miami. With the government shut, those people are at home. No data is being collected. Now, you might remember that back in October, they did a weird one-off. The government directed the BLS to recall just enough staff to publish the September CPI. Why? Because the Social Security Administration legally needed that number to calculate the cost of living adjustment for tens of millions of retirees. It was a perfect example of political absurdity. They turned the lights back on for one day to print one number for one specific purpose, and then plunged the rest of the economy back into darkness. As a result, an October CPI report is looking increasingly unlikely. The Fed is flying blind on inflation, the very thing they've been fighting tooth and nail for 2 years. So what happens when the official data disappears? Everyone runs to their favorite private data source, and a battle of competing narratives begins. It's like arguing over who won a football game when the scoreboard is broken and each team has its own stats keeper. This is where the Fed's internal divide becomes a chasm. Team Dove is pointing at the private payroll data. The ADP report, which tracks hiring from its massive client base, came out this week and showed job growth was still muted in October, and heavily concentrated in just a few sectors like healthcare. They're screaming, see. The slowdown is real. The summer slump wasn't a blip. We need to cut rates in December before this gets worse. They argue that acting preemptively is the only responsible choice when your main gauges are broken. Team Hawk is clapping back, pointing at a different dataset. They're looking at weekly filings for unemployment insurance, which are processed by state governments and are still being published. And those numbers haven't budged. They remain stubbornly low, suggesting that companies aren't laying people off in large numbers. The hawks are shouting, hold your horses. We just cut rates twice based on a hunch. The biggest risk is still inflation, which we can't even measure right now. Cutting rates would be pouring gasoline on a fire we can't see. They argue that the default action, when you have no information, should be to do nothing. This leaves Jerome Powell in an impossible position. He's the parent in the car with 2 kids in the back screaming, "Are we there yet?" and "I have to go to the bathroom," at the same time, while the GPS is dead and the road signs are in a foreign language. And what about the market? The people actually managing trillions of dollars? They are just as confused. This week in the Treasury market, the bedrock of the global financial system, was a complete mess. One day, the soft ADP data comes out, and investors rush to buy bonds, pushing yields on the 10-year Treasury down. They're betting on a weaker economy and a Fed rate cut. The next day, a report from the outplacement firm Challenger, Gray & Christmas shows announced layoffs are still relatively low. Suddenly, investors sell bonds, and yields pop back up. Then another firm, Revelio Labs, which scrapes millions of online job postings, shows a slight uptick in hiring appetite. Yields wiggle again. Every scrap of private, second-tier data is causing multi-billion-dollar swings in the market. As Ed Al-Husseini at Columbia Threadneedle said, it underscores a tricky situation for everyone. The market is desperate for a signal, any signal, but all it's getting is noise. For now, futures markets are still pricing in a better than 50% chance of a December rate cut, meaning investors think Team Dove will win the day. But that's a bet, not a certainty. Okay, let's bring this home. Why should you, a hard-working individual trying to build a life, care about this statistical squabble in Washington? Because the Fed's decisions, or indecisions, have a direct line into your bank account. One, not your job security. If the Fed, fearing inflation they can't see, keeps rates too high for too long, they could tip a slowing economy into a full-blown recession. That means layoffs. That means your job, or your neighbor's job, could be on the line. 2. Not your cost of borrowing. If the Fed, spooked by unreliable weak data, cuts rates unnecessarily, it could reignite inflation. But in the short term, the uncertainty itself is toxic. The volatility we're seeing in the Treasury market directly impacts mortgage rates. 1 week a 30-year fixed mortgage might be 6.8%, the next it's 7.1%. That volatility makes it impossible for families to plan, for builders to build, and for the housing market to find its footing. 3. Your investments, your 401k, your IRA, your brokerage account, they all hate uncertainty. A blind Fed creates radical uncertainty. The market becomes a casino, swinging wildly based on rumors and second-rate data. That's not a healthy environment for long-term investing. The full picture is this: the government shutdown is no longer a political spectacle confined to cable news. It has metastasized into an act of economic self-sabotage. The politicians who caused the shutdown, in their quest for leverage, have effectively taken the dashboard out of the economy's car while it's doing 80 miles an hour down the highway. They have created a problem where there are no good outcomes. Scenario 1, the Fed holds steady in December. If the economy is truly weakening, they will be behind the curve, and a recession becomes more likely. Scenario 2, the Fed cuts rates again. If the labor market is actually fine and inflation is still lurking, they will have poured fuel on the fire, making their job harder down the road and eroding their credibility. Even when the shutdown ends and the data eventually gets released, it will forever have an asterisk next to it. Economists will call it a data scar. The numbers will be distorted, unreliable, and subject to endless debate. The uncertainty this has created will have a long tail, complicating economic decisions for months, if not years, to come. This is the ultimate irony: a political system so broken that it actively prevents our most important economic institution from doing its job, creating the very economic instability that politicians will later campaign on fixing. It's a self-inflicted wound of epic proportions. So as we head towards that December meeting, the Federal Reserve isn't just making a choice about interest rates. They are making a choice in an information vacuum created by political failure, and every single one of us will have to live with the consequences. That's all for today, folks. It's a messy world out there, but at least now you have the full picture. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you on Team Dove or Team Hawk? Or are you on Team Can the adults please get back in the room? Until next time, stay sharp, stay informed, and don't let them fly you blind.